The new plans by the government not unveiled yet. We are expecting them perhaps to be outlined tomorrow. But it seems very clear what the government's objective is. In fact, Rishi Sunak saying over the weekend, make no mistake, if you come here illegally, you will not be able to stay. Your reaction to this tightening of the laws by the UK government?
It's utterly dismal. It does nothing to fix the absolute mess the government has made of the UK's asylum system, which is costing an awful lot of money and doing an awful lot of harm to people. It is exactly the policy, in fact, that the government has been pursuing for at least the last 4 years, from excessive measures by successive Home Secretaries, simply designed to avoid this country's responsibilities that this country expects others should take, and indeed others do take in far greater volume than do we. And unless and until we are going to buck up and simply get on with the job of fairly and efficiently deciding the claims that are actually made here, I'm afraid things are going to get significantly worse.
Yes, an interesting point you make there, and one that should be talked about in the context of this is the backlog of asylum claims. Those who come to the UK can seek asylum once they're here, but once they're in that system, we're talking months, years. Are we any clearer as to why that is taking so long?
It's manifestly clear why it's taking so long. It's because the government decided a few years ago, particularly at the end of 2020, to effectively refuse to process people's claims. It took the ridiculous decision that somehow it would persuade other countries who already take far more responsibility than do we to receive our responsibilities for people on top of their own. Of course, it was never going to be practical. It won't be now. And so simply ratcheting up that exact same policy by ever more legislation can't resolve the backlog, because whether the number of people making new claims goes up or down, if people don't get out of your system, the backlog must get bigger. And that's exactly what's happened over the last 4 years. And we are in an utter mess now. And it's just extraordinary that ministers keep pursuing exactly the same gamble, despite all the evidence and cost that their gamble keeps causing to the taxpayer, to the people stuck in this system most certainly, and to any idea that people smuggling and human trafficking and human exploitation is ever going to be addressed. Because, of course, the people who are vulnerable to all this are just made more vulnerable if you don't attend to their needs. And unfortunately, the government seems set on that.
Yes, Steve, I don't know if you were listening to our report before we came to you live from Ali Fortescue. She was speaking to a young man who, made that perilous journey to seek asylum here in the UK. And he said, it was the last chance I had. And with the government framing their legislation as a deterrent, you do wonder if any measure the government puts in place will be an effective deterrent to people who see the UK as their last chance. Are they fighting a losing battle on that front?
The government is completely deluding itself, as well as deluding many of the British public at the same time. People do not get into small boats. They do not make these journeys, endure the misery, not just on the last stretch of the journey, but throughout, and all the violence and mistreatment of many people smugglers and human traffickers. They don't endure all that for some mere jolly of having a chance to get across the water. They do it because they desperately have to. And unless and until ministers face up to the human reality, apart from the legal responsibilities, I'm afraid all this talk of stopping boats rather than thinking about the realities of people's lives is why our policy keeps going so dramatically wrong.
And Steve, the government are talking about, cutting down on illegal migration, and they have said that they will seek to provide more safe routes, more legal routes. They'll be looking at this, but I think it was the Cabinet Minister, Michelle Donnellan, over the weekend, when pressed on this, couldn't actually name any yet. Presumably, it's in the pipeline. Do you trust the government to stay true to that, to come up with safe routes?
Because they have not been true to that. They made exactly the same promise when they passed the last piece of legislation less than a year ago to do what they are now attempting to do even more of. And they created no safe routes during that legislation or since. The simple fact is that for a very long time now, the UK has maintained a system that requires anybody who wishes to seek asylum in this country, however much connection they have to this country, to require them to make a journey with a visa and get here to make that claim. And at the same time of making all those requirements, the UK maintains immigration rules that refuse anybody, any visa, to come for that purpose. So it's just utterly nonsensical. I mean, effectively, it's a lie perpetrated on the public as well. There are no lawfully provided routes by the government, which is why smugglers thrive, and simply ratcheting that up is just going to make more profits for smugglers.
Steve Valdez-Symonds, any of those new safe routes promised, I'm sure if the government want to put those details out there as alongside the new legislation, hopefully they will do in the coming days. Steve Valdez-Symonds there from Amnesty International talking about the new legislation, the outline of which the government are putting forward this week, we assume tomorrow. Thank you for your time.